With just a couple of introductions. I'm Jan Joanides with Renewing the Countryside, and today we're going to hear from Jessica Joyce, who's the market manager at the Rochester Farmers Market in Rochester, Minnesota, who, well, you'll hear about the innovation that she has put forward in response to COVID-19 to continue her market. A little background on why Renewing the Countryside and the Farmers Market Hub is hosting this. There have been a group of organizations, my organization, the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture at the U, and the Minnesota Farmers Market Association, who have worked together under a specialty crop block grant. We're just entering into a third of those, but it was through that grant process and the work that we were able to do under that some of the some infrastructure was in place that Jess was able to kind of jump off on and bring a lot more to the table. So I just quickly want my colleagues who have been part of that project, if you can just introduce yourselves and turn your video on for a second so people can see you. Jane and Kathy and Sarah and Cecilia, if you're on.
Hello, I'm Sarah George, and I'm with the Wabasha Farmers Market as well as the Red Wing Farmers Market, and I am one of the mentors on this project.
Thanks, Sarah. Jane, Kathy, Cecilia.
Hi, I'm Jane Jewett. I'm with the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, and I've also been part of the project team and mentor of northern Minnesota markets.
I saw Kathy's name there, but
sorry, Kathy Zeman, Minnesota Farmers Market Association, joining just a few seconds late.
And is Cecilia on? Or Grace? Okay, well, we will, oh, I do
Grace
see
is on.
Grace. Grace, you want to say hello?
Sure, I can say hello real quick. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.
Great. All right, well, with that, we'll turn it over to Jess and let her take us through what she's done. And our plan here is to include lots of time for questions. And some of those questions, you can certainly ask them in the chat room, and then we can ask Jess as she goes through things. I think if you have a question while we're going through it, I think that's fine to ask it at the time rather than waiting until the end. But if it gets to be a long discussion, I might just move it to the end if it's something that can be answered relatively quickly. So with that, and I would just say if you're not muted when you're not talking, please put yourself on mute. I can also mute you. Apparently that's the great power I have as being the host. So Jess, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Jess Joyce. I hope that everyone can see my screen. I'm assuming that you can. So Jan went through the background to this project, and those of you who are part of Rochester Farmers Markets or have been associated with the project are familiar with the fact that we were part of this pilot program, which was funded by a specialty crop block grant since 2018. And the original idea with the Farmers Market Hub was that it was a way to diversify income for farmers market growers and to reach out to our institutions, to restaurants, to schools, to healthcare organizations, and provide a wholesale mechanism to sell to those institutions. So that is where a lot of the infrastructure came from on this, and why a couple weeks ago, when the world turned upside down a little bit, we felt that we had what we needed to start using the farmers market as a centralized hub to aggregate farmers products and then sell them to individual consumers instead of institutions. So I don't know, Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about Wabasha Farmers Market and about the 10 markets that are involved in this project?
Sure. We started this project in 2018 through the specialty crop block grant with the Department of Agriculture, where we were going to aggregate or combine produce from multiple farms to sell to those schools, hospitals, and restaurants. And we asked around the state of Minnesota who would be interested in joining us. So we have Cook, Aiken, Grand Rapids, Chisago City, Richfield, Rochester, Cannon Falls, Lake City, Wabasha, and I feel like I'm missing one. Cannon Falls, Rochester, Wabasha, Cook.
I think that's right.
Grand Rapids. Anyhow, we started this project 3 years ago with the intention of being able to help these farmers markets become food hubs without a brick and mortar in a safe and legal manner to provide access to local foods to those institutions that are looking for it. Oftentimes there's obstacles when you're sourcing local foods, and some of those obstacles, I'm a farmer myself, I'm a market manager, and I work in a restaurant that uses as much locally grown produce as they can. And so that allows me to see some of those obstacles from many different channels. And in seeing that, I was trying to think through what are some ways that we could overcome those. And having an online platform where product is available seemed to make a lot of sense. So that's where this project started. Okay.
Yep. So when we set it up, the idea was that the market would actually pull a profit from being the aggregator. So the idea is farmers will list their products on the platform, and then the hub puts a 14% markup on the grower price. So the customer in this example pays $1.14. The farmer keeps $1 and the hub keeps 14 cents. So that is one of the few models, and I've heard it presented this way, that the market is actually able to help offset some of its operating costs. So I put together a little schematic here for how this works for retail customers. And we're going to walk through some photos of how it looks at our market. But basically, the farmers have listed their products on an online store. The customers make a purchase online, and then the farmers bring their product all to the market on a certain day or time. And we go through and individually pack orders for individual customers, and then the customers come through our drive-through line and we load their groceries into their vehicles. So that's how it's worked the past couple of weeks. It's an evolving model, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of that approach. In order to pull this off, Rochester Farmers Markets is licensed as a food handler through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And I know that that has what has enabled us to serve as an aggregator. I think I talked about the markup, other things that we are using that 14% to pay for. So we coordinate this project. We do a lot of customer service. We onboard the vendors. We market this model to the customers, to the community. There's a fee associated with being licensed as a food handler. And then we have equipment costs and costs for the online platform. The benefit, though, is that we're using, as Sarah mentioned, it's a low overhead approach. The market already exists, that the fact that the farmers have agreed to meet up on a specific date is already in place. So we have a lot of the resources, and we're limiting costs as far as a traditional food hub, which has a brick and mortar building and a lot of overhead operating costs. Sarah did a lot of work in 2018 vetting online platforms, and the way that we are currently set up is with a provider called Local Line, who's out of Canada. Sarah can talk a little bit about how Local Line works.
Absolutely. So Local Line is an online sales platform where where you can aggregate or combine produce from multiple farms. In the picture you see here, you're going to see the beef patties. Underneath the name beef patties, it actually says Manning Meats. You can see who the farmer is, how much product they have, what the price is, if there's differences in price breaks. And the very next line, those Chioggia beets are from Fairview Farm. So you can have it all listed on one sales platform in one place. So your institutions or your farmers market customers don't have to visit multiple websites in order to place orders for each of the individual farmers. In 2018, I did receive a SARE grant to do some research for online sales platforms, and dove deep into 26 different platforms and found that at that point in time, actually found that Local Orbit was the one that would be most convenient for our use. Local Line and Local Orbit have since merged, and therefore Local Line is the platform of our choice. We are not saying that Local Line is the platform that everybody should use. We're just using this as the opportunity. This is the one that we are using. Through this platform, there's several different options for you to consider. You can do a monthly or an annual subscription like she has listed here. If you prepay annually, they do give you, they may offer you a discount for the prepaid annual subscription. That hub versus market model is something to consider when you're looking at setting up your platform. So the hub model is what we have. And the hub model is one payment, one checkout, one delivery, or one pickup, depending on which way you want to go. Where the market model, you're still going to see the same thing on the sales platform, except when you get to the checkout. At the checkout, each of your individual vendors at a farmer's market are going to have their own delivery or delivery fee or pickup location. They're also going to have their own checkout. And so if you purchase products from 5 farmers, you're going to have to check out 5 separate times and work out the delivery logistics on that. For us, we wanted to make it convenient on the farmer side and on the buyer side. And we chose that hub model because then we were doing the aggregating or the combining. Through the hub model, very briefly, that does mean that all funds now do run through the farmer's market instead of running through the vendor's pockets. So that's a new thing to think about.
Right, so we had this platform in place. There's a learning curve associated with it. But we do now have, I believe it's 19 suppliers that are active on that platform and selling products that they would otherwise have been selling at our indoor winter farmers markets. And then I did want to leave some space for Kathy to step in and talk about the evolution of the legalities and recommendations for farmers markets in Minnesota, and what we've been working on over the past couple of weeks.
Thanks, Jess. Kathy Zeman, Minnesota Farmers Market Association. So on March 16th, when the Executive Order 04 went through, did say markets would be allowed to stay open. We were in the same category as grocery stores. And since it didn't explicitly say farmers markets, and we wanted to make sure that we were considered essential services in Minnesota, we did reach out to Commissioner Tom Peterson. He's our Ag Commissioner, a wonderful Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And Commissioner Peterson worked that magic and made sure that it did come down that farmers markets are exempted from closing as long as we do not offer on-site consumption of food. That includes food sampling. And then we're encouraged to do drive-throughs like what Jess is doing at the Rochester Farmers Market. We follow the 6 feet social distancing and we wash our hands. And so today, even today, we're all still good to go as long as we continue to do those things.
Did you want to mention the Thursday calls too?
Oh, thanks, Jess. So every Thursday, anybody is welcome to jump on our open Zoom calls. It's an hour long. They might be Hopefully we get them down to 10 minutes and then 5 minutes, because it means we've solved all of our issues. But currently it's an hour, and tomorrow I know we're going to lead with some innovative layout designs for markets that we're testing, and we'll have some SNAP and Market Buck updates from David Nicholson and Hunger Solutions. We'll start with those, and then you can jump on and ask any question you want related to farmers markets in 2020. And we've got all the people on there so we can quickly get answers. And if we can't, we just we'll get them the next week. Okay. So thanks, Jess.
Yeah, you bet. So that's where we started out, trying to gather and use and make productive progress with all of this information coming from the state level, from the federal level, and then from our local public health department. So this was on, let's see, March 16th that the initial executive order came out. And so our next market after that point was March 21st. And we have since had one other indoor winter farmers market on April 4th. Our approach after consulting with my board of directors was to try to support as many of our businesses as possible. So we put into place having the winter market open with precautions. And then we also implemented this drive-through pilot. So I'll go somewhat quickly through our approach to the indoor market being open, and then spend a little more time on the drive-through. Just a quick summary about our farmers market. We are the only growers market in Rochester, Minnesota. Rochester has a population of about 120,000. Typically, we operate 3 markets. We are open year-round. We have about 100 small businesses that are part of our market association. Let's see, the summer Saturday markets, we average between 65 and 75 vendors per market. And then winter is about 25 to 30. This was the layout that we put into place for being open and hosting the drive-through at the same time. The blue square in your screen is our winter farmers market building. So that's where the photos that you're going to see of hand wash stations and the market info booth and our vendors being spaced out. That took place inside the building. And then we were fortunate that the road was closed here. So we converted the whole space to one side of the building into this drive-through pickup zone. Prior to this, I mentioned that we had 25 to 30 vendors, 28 to 30 per market. Our typical winter markets took 2 staff to manage. We saw several hundred customers a week, and we had an average market gross sales of over $14,000. Prior to March, the middle of March, we were seeing some of our best winter markets ever. We had vendor sales anywhere in the $400 to $1,400 a week range. So shaping up to be a pretty solid season. This is just for comparison to some of the future numbers. When we were looking at this guidance, we felt, and we still currently feel, that the most important things we need to achieve at an open farmers market are achieving the physical distancing of 6 feet, having plentiful access to hand washing, and doing a lot of communicating and enforcement to ensure that customers are shopping efficiently. This photo is from our market on the 21st of March. And so since then, we have seen new recommendations about personal protective equipment, about face shields, and we plan to have those in place for the next open farmers market. So increasing signage, increasing communication. How are we going to communicate to our customers this new normal that we would like them to achieve? We have been focusing on the phrase shop efficiently. Another phrase that I've been hearing a lot that I think is critical that we implement is limiting the number of shoppers per family, and limiting any kind of congregation inside of the market. We also had, because this market is indoors, we had volunteers there to open the door, encourage sanitary practices, and then also point out that we had hand wash stations for everyone to use just inside. This is our 2 hand wash stations just inside the door. I've pointed out to several folks that, and MFMA has a beautiful diagram for how to put together a really low budget hand wash station. We also were fortunate to have a SHIP grant, Statewide Health Improvement Partnership grant, that purchased this sturdy hand wash station on the left. And that unit was about $450, and I highly recommend it. Another thing, we used additional signage around the hand wash stations. We felt that those were really well used and they were well received by our customers. I think that that's something unique to farmers markets that we aren't seeing yet at grocery stores, is just one opportunity after another to wash your hands. On the photo on the right is our market info booth setup from a couple of weeks ago. At this point, we were still accepting tokens. We use the token system to accept SNAP as well as credit and debit at the market. And research is showing us that the on hard surfaces like on the wooden or plastic tokens, those sit for a week after use, and so they are considered to still be sanitary when we bring them back into the market the next week. We received a lot of positive feedback from customers at this first open market on the 21st. I think customers most appreciated the folks at the door. And then part of this talk, we wanted to look in a little more detail at the economics of one option versus the other, since Rochester was able to do both. So some expenses associated with staying open. We had 2 market staff, some 10-person hours. Staffing those markets, we also had 3 door volunteers, total of 6 hours. I mentioned that the hand wash station was $450, and then we had 5 hand wash stations that were the cheaper ones arranged throughout the building. Another cost was associated with token sanitizing, and because in Minnesota the SNAP dollars are associated with market bucks bonus match, we are going to be throwing those away every week and using them as a single-use item, so we might incur some additional costs purchasing new tokens and market bucks. Benefits to staying open. This market was able to have 19 vendors even though we were inside. We achieved that in a safe way. Median sales for vendors at that market was $343 and a gross of $7,600. So that first market was probably about half as profitable as the previous or as the average winter market. I think this past weekend was even slower. So, and we're not sure if that's a communication issue, if it's just a general trend of the public not coming out to the market. Another issue we ran into is we had so much success with our drive-through that it looked from the road like the market was not open because everyone was waiting in line. So some communication, some hurdles to work through with that. I was glad that we had winter farmers markets running so that we got a chance to practice with these new best practices. So here's the walkthrough of our online ordering. We did a drive-through pickup and we also offered delivery. I had a diagram at the very beginning that showed how we had vendors' products sorted into individual customer packages. That was the overall layout for this whole process. I am seeing, but not actually seeing, questions pop up. And so, Jan, if you're seeing those in the chat and want to just restate them, I'd be happy to answer questions as we're going along also.
I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. So our vendors, we asked them to individually package and individually label each of their orders. And that worked out really great. So you can see, and some of them, Squash Blossom Farm put a lot of extra effort into encouraging some positivity with their labeling. But that idea of individual packaging was also to decrease number of people touching the product in between the farmer and the consumer. We also found that having the vendors label their packages if they had more than one package, one of one or one of two, two of two, etc. That's really critical in making sure we get everything in the right order. Oh, I'm sorry. On the tables, we had arranged customer invoices in a sequential row throughout the room. This is what tables look like when they were full of product. We really quickly learned that the orders took up a lot more space than we were anticipating. And so having a space to arrange tables in this configuration is one of our big limits so far. So this week we're recommending vendors, if they have sold more than one table's worth of product through this system, we're asking them to bring tables so that we can stage their product for them. As folks arrived at the drive-thru, we had a volunteer on the road directing them where to go. We had our local line platform set up on a purchase order system, so you can actually place an order without paying online. The reason that we did this, one was to encourage customers who don't feel safe putting their credit card information on the internet. And then another was so that we were still able to accept SNAP. You cannot use an EBT card to buy food online. However, we were able to process SNAP transactions at the market when they showed up. I've heard this mentioned before, and it was so true this last weekend that people are so willing to follow instructions and follow in line. We didn't have any trouble with traffic at all. They would show up at the door. This door is where we were going into the building to fetch orders. They would confirm their order number with a volunteer who would check to make sure that they had paid, and if they hadn't, would run their card for them. And then we had them swing around and wait in a couple of parallel rows parked for a volunteer to retrieve their order. Another key thing that we learned here is that we needed to assign a runner to each vehicle as it went through. So when we knew their order number, we assigned that to a volunteer, and the volunteer was responsible for retrieving the entire order and putting it in that vehicle before the car was complete. We had a separate sanitation station for our volunteers, so they had their hand wash right there. And then we also offered gloves, and then of course this week we will have masks for the volunteers. This is a local line thing. So customer placing an order receives an order number in their email. And we have the ability through this system to email every customer who's made a purchase with a couple of tips. I was astonished at how well they read their emails. We said, you know, please prepare your order and put it in your driver's side window. And this weekend, I would say 80% of the cars never rolled down their window, right? They just had the number in the window and we retrieved their order. So very, very low personal contact. Again, the products arranged on the tables. One thing we found was that having a larger bag or having some way to put orders together was really critical. We had MetroNet sponsor originally reusable bags. We're not reusing the bags right now. And so that's a continual cost that we're having to evaluate if we can or cannot get those bags sponsored every week. We had 120 orders the first week and 245 the second. So we're going through a lot of these bags. Another consideration with this model, we are able to sell frozen meats, dairy, eggs, all sorts of products through the system that need to be refrigerated and they need to be kept temperature controlled. I actually might pause here and let Jane step in with how temperature control works and what we needed to achieve there. Jane, are you available to do that?
Sure, I can jump in on that. So temperature control mainly is just, you know, keeping hot food hot, keeping cold food cold. And in the case of this market, it was keeping cold food cold. So eggs in Minnesota need to be held at 45 degrees Fahrenheit or lower after they've been candled, graded, packed, labeled, and so forth. And then any meat or dairy that is not frozen needs to be held at 41 degrees or lower. And any frozen items need to be held at 0 degrees or lower. So there, you know, that was a little bit of a sticky wicket, I guess, for the market because they were holding product in trailers outside. And so that product was separate from the rest of the order and then had to be grabbed and assembled with the rest of the order when the customer showed up. We do have a state of Minnesota guidance document on staging food for delivery. And that does allow holding deliveries in coolers as long as those temps can be maintained. So that might give some markets more flexibility if you don't have a trailer or a freezer but then you have to have a whole bunch of coolers and ice packs and so forth. So that is a little bit of a logistical problem, and I'll turn it back to Jess to talk about how they.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we have done, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this works this weekend, is similar with the tables. We requested that vendors who sold enough product that they would need to keep it in a cooler, they commit to leaving their cooling system with us for the whole market. So for example, one of my vendors works out of a refrigerated van, and they brought that whole van and plugged it in, and actually had one of their children stand in the vehicle and help us with the organization of their products and ensure that their products stayed cold, which the vendor was into that too. Obviously, that is really important to their quality, that they are able to keep stuff cold. So anyway, refrigeration is something to work through, and certainly something as we're looking forward to summer when it gets hot and everything wilts. Keeping things cold while they're being staged for pickup is going to be one of our biggest challenges. I wanted to talk a little about the numbers. I know it's not the most interesting thing to look at tables, but just a comparison from our first week to our second week. So these were 2 weeks apart. We had double the number of orders. The success rate on here has to do with orders after the end of the day that we felt the need to follow up on. And Sarah and I are both very detail-oriented people. And so we spent a lot of time and work responding to customer questions, any concerns that were brought up. Certainly the first week we had some issues where products didn't end up in the bags that they should have been, or they were miscounted. And so we made additional deliveries after the fact of items that were missed. So in doubling our orders, we went down we went from about 5 errors to about 25 errors. But certainly a great learning experience, and we came away with a lot of lessons learned that I think will help limit those issues. Again, going back to the space on the tables, that was probably one of the key parts where we were making errors, was not having good separation between orders on the tables. So yeah, double the number of orders, but almost 3 times the sales in the second week. So we have not had to promote this at all, and I have heard some advice from other groups working on these kinds of projects to try to keep them small, because it is very overwhelming. So with that markup, the market has profited from each of those events. So $700 the first week, $1,700 the second week. That has been sufficient so far to offset the time that we've put into it. So really great from a sustainability perspective. One thing that's been challenging from an accounting point of view is that the money's coming in all sorts of different ways. They're paying online, they're paying with check and cash at the market. We had a partner organization there with a PayPal account that they were paying through. So the actual follow-up on the accounting has been challenging. We also saw average purchase increase in the second week, and then an increase in the suppliers participating. I've got another graph of this if anyone loves graphs as much as me. So these are box and whisker plots. On the left is the hub sales. So basically you can see that we increased significantly in our number of sales. And then those are the payments to the vendors. So the first week vendors made between 100 and 350 bucks. And then the second week they made 150 to 1,000. So it was very successful for our vendors who were participating. And then on the right, average customer purchases. So more purchases, higher dollar the second time around. And then as far as staffing, this is absolutely the biggest cost associated with this project. And we've been fortunate that we've had a huge amount of volunteer support and people who are passionate about making this work. But here's some of the ways that we were using staff. So prior to opening, we put a lot of staff time into learning the platform, onboarding vendors, managing the platform, and working through kind of kinks in that system, communicating everything to all of the vendors and all of the customers, and then setup of the market space. On the day of, we also relied really heavily on volunteers. I don't know how we're going to do this without a flock of people trying to be useful. But the volunteers have been amazing. So they do all of the sorting and packing on the morning of the market. And they also served as quality control, so going back through and making sure the orders were correct. Working out any issues. Sometimes we had to go to the market vendors and acquire extra product or return doubles of things. We had what we called librarians. So having a volunteer who's versed in what orders are on what tables is really important. Having the greeter at the door, traffic control, and then assigning individual volunteers to each vehicle that showed up. And then in the wrap up, this has mostly been staff time too, as far as making sure that the accounting is in the right place, paying out to vendors to make it worth their while. And then we did some follow-ups and surveying of customers after the fact. A little bit of a breakdown on staff time. These are pretty information heavy graphs, but the first week we spent a total of 238 hours. Only 87 of those were paid on the project. We figured a staff cost of $1,400. You can see that most of the work went into setup and onboarding, and then followed by work on the day of, which was spread between, I think it was 15 volunteers and 2 staff, and then time on wrap up. So, and then on the right, about equal time was spent with sorting and packing and working on the platform. A lot more time in the first week on communication and working with the team. So then let's see, comparatively, the second week we were about 100 hours less. So 146 hours went to setting it up. Pretty equally split between pre-work and then day of work. I'm going to call for some reinforcements on this slide, but this is when I say that the infrastructure was already in place. There's a lot that goes into thinking about the market as an aggregator. So we needed to be licensed. We needed to have a relationship with an MDA inspector. In order to get our license, we needed to develop policies to ensure that our workers had good hygiene and that our products were transported in a clean manner. We needed to do some work on insurance. And then there has since been some accounting issues that we hadn't thought through. For example, the farmer's market had never charged sales tax before. So I've got help from my vendors who deal with that all the time, working on that. And then I think I'm going to throw this one to Jane also. So when we're looking at sustainability, there are costs associated with each of these steps. And so that's just something that folks need to consider. And I don't know, Jane, did you want to talk any more about sustainability?
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit. So the markets that have been involved in this specialty crop block grant project have each been asked to do a sustainability estimate where the market walks through these costs that Jess listed and also their potential for income through the market for that 14% markup. I see Elena Byrne just posted that co-ops, like brick and mortar co-ops, add more than the 14% margin. Our markets in this project were adding a 12 to 14% markup to farmers' products because of recommendations and research done by the Cooperative Development Services Organization in Wisconsin. They have researched the costs of each portion of the supply chain and determined that for the services that our markets were offering with this aggregation and distribution, that the 12 to 14% range was appropriate. So, so looking at what the markets need to pull in dollars of total sales through the market itself in order to capture enough money through that 14% to maintain the market functions. Some of the markets in smaller cities were looking at around $30,000 worth of product. Jess, I did not happen to look at Rochester's sustainability estimate. So do you remember what you came up with for total dollar sales you had to pull through?
Yeah, I believe that it was 36,000. But I think that the workload that we estimated for that model was less than this one. There's a lot more work involved when your customers are 600 different people as opposed to 5 or 6 large buyers.
Correct. Yep. So we do have a couple of example spreadsheets available for that sustainability estimate if people are interested in them. One of them is a little bit more of a thinking through with pen and paper, perhaps, or in your mind, and then putting things into the spreadsheet. And one of them developed by Cecilia Coulter, who's one of our project team members, has a more automated method of doing those calculations with boxes that will calculate for you the amount of time of manager time that you need to add, like per additional customer, per additional vendor, per additional CSA box, and things like that. So it is definitely something that customers really want to see, but there are definitely also costs to the market that need to be figured out and accounted for if this is going to be sustainable.
Yeah, we're clearly still working through that ourselves. I wanted to go a little bit into the wrap up. So Jan Joanitas, who's hosting this call, put together a survey for our vendors after the first week that we offered this option. We asked them how often they typically shop at our regular farmers markets, and we found out that most of these customers were our regular customers. That's probably how they heard about it, since they're already following our communications. This, however, I thought was incredibly important, especially given today's circumstances. So we asked customers, would you have shopped at the farmers market on Saturday if the online ordering pickup was not available? And more than 3/4 of them said that they would not have shopped if they couldn't have shopped online. And so that's something that we can't ignore. And that is part of what's driving us to push this project forward and make it work, even though we're not sure yet completely how to make it sustainable. Similarly, the feedback has been incredible. From the management standpoint, it's intimidating, it's frustrating. Sometimes it seems like you have no idea what you're doing, but the customers have been so completely patient and supportive and understanding and willing to listen and read their emails. And I think they will give you a little bit of leeway as you're figuring this out. Another thing that we are working on and working through is communication. I think I mentioned before that having a line for the drive-through caused customers not to think that we were open as a farmer's market. And so that's challenging when you're in the business of trying to support 100 different small businesses. You want them all to succeed. And so how are we going to communicate if we're open, how we're open, what we want shopping to look like, how we want customers to get online, what happens if we have vendors who don't want to sell with our online system, how are we going to support them? So a couple of things that we're trying, we reminded everyone that we were open. We used a newsletter to kind of tell the longer story. And then we posted links to our online store on our website. We also created a blog list that featured each of our vendors who sell online but don't sell through our platform. And then we added a Shop Now button to our Facebook. I mentioned the customer feedback. The media feedback has also been really positive. I know that that is not uniformly the case. And so I feel fortunate in our community, at least, that we haven't had to deal with some of the negative feedback. I think it's hard because a lot of the public views a farmer's market as a social gathering or just a fun thing that people do. And we have cast away that identity and really tried to embrace the idea that this is a grocery market, that this is a critical infrastructure for our community. And so the media that came out to that market that first weekend, they were willing to hear that and help us tell that story. So that's my summary. That's what I've got. I see that there are questions coming through. I think I'm going to hand back to Jan to see what you guys want to talk about next.
Yeah, and I will bring up just a couple of the questions that in the chat, and others feel free to bring them up too. And if people want to, unmute and ask a question, that is fine too. Steve asked about whether the market had to toss anything and if there was any shrinkage.
We're talking about product?
Yep.
So we have not, and I mentioned at the beginning that we were requiring the vendors to individually package their own products. And for this model, I think that has been really critical. And when we had customer issues or concerns about the products, we reminded them that my staff and our volunteers had not visually inspected or opened or looked into the bags at all. We were just taking the products that we were given and repackaging them into customer orders. I think that's important from a public health standpoint, but it is also important to keep in mind that there are lots of different businesses in our market, and when summer comes around and we have 70 different people with green beans, that's going to be, right now looks like it's going to be on the customer to browse by supplier and to build a relationship with a farmer and use that knowledge of the farmer's quality to make their decision.
Great. There was another question about whether there was any noise from any of the other groceries in town.
We have an excellent relationship with our co-op, and it was great. I actually was intimidated about how this was going to go. I was fielding a lot of calls from vendors, and so I